make sure you've got the right policy, and be absolutely scrupulously honest with your insurance company, because if you give them the least excuse not to pay out, they'll take it. I can say that, can't I? It's true. We were, in our case, spending our life savings. And this was the house we were going to live in for the rest of our lives. So in the Navy used to say there's no such thing as poor practices. When you're firing a gun or a missile, it's poor preparation. And you get the preparation right, then the rest of it should be easy. So the Navy brought me to Plymouth in '95, and we bought a house, a ruined house on the seafront, and we did it up a bit over a couple of years, but not that well because we couldn't afford to at the time. We wanted to stay here, but this house required an awful lot of maintenance. The front wall leaked, the windows were all old wooden ones. Clearly we were going to have to spend quite a lot on it to make it suitable for the last 20, 30 years of our life. We knew there'd been planning approval in the 70s, 80s for a block of flats on the garden, so we thought we'd get it. We decided we were going to definitely stay here, and so we thought we'd build a house on the plot next door. We appointed an architect about a fortnight after we had the idea. He put together a design, but because there was an awful lot of opposition from the neighbour next door, it took a year, in fact 13 months, to get planning approval. The house was fundamentally designed to be an eco-house.
These are some boards our architect prepared for us to take to the planning committee. And this one I think is the most interesting because it shows before and after. And here is the gap with the very blank gable wall of next door. And then here is the house we hoped to build. And you can see what Andrew was saying about echoing the copper elements. And also we tried to echo the sort of slight feeling of a tower that you've got here. This is a model Andrew made based on the architect's drawings, which I think he did very well.
We were trying to, make it clearly modern, but also be respectful to the properties either side of us and match the whole row along the front. And that's in fact what the local historian described this plot as the missing tooth in Plymouth's smile. So this is the only unbuilt plot on the seafront, and we were going to fill it with what we thought was a suitable house to make the seafront look good. Having got through planning, it then took us another year to get a party wall award because of the opposition from next door and constant little changes here, there and everywhere, which when we got it, they then took us to court over it, so we had to go to legal mediation, which took another 3 months. So by this stage, we're almost 2.5 years into the process. We're just about through that, and then COVID struck. So when we got out of COVID, we cleared the site and started piling. And as a part of the party wall agreement, we had a set of very, very strict criteria for vibration levels, because we knew that the house next door was not that strong. And about a couple of weeks into piling, we had a quite high vibration. It had been sitting right on the bottom of the scale. And suddenly one went up to sort of 3/4 of the permitted level, so we stopped, looked around, couldn't see anything. Started drilling the next hole, when it went up to almost the permitted level, so it stopped again. And the builder had a good look around and discovered that the side wall of next door had basically separated from the rest of the house. And there were great big cracks up the front facade. So at that point we stopped, rang the insurers. Fortunately, we had taken our non-negligence insurance for £5 million, and God, I'm glad we did.
The important thing to understand about non-negligent insurance is that it will only react to damage that's sudden, unforeseen and unexpected. So quite often when people are doing really quite complicated works within structures that are in a terrace, for example, it's not unusual to have an amount of inevitable damage. So if you're digging a basement between two properties that don't have a basement, then the chances of your property and their property moving slightly are reasonably high. With this project, there wasn't any inevitable damage, so we didn't have to think about that. Clearly, there'd been structural damage to the neighbouring property as a result of the works, so that was a really good trigger. Andrew and his contractor had stayed within the policy parameters as far as vibration limits were concerned, which meant we could actually tick all the boxes.
So no, I wasn't particularly stressed, but then, I'm a naval warfare officer. So my training has let me to cope with stress. And the insurers then got involved. The engineers came and looked at it. They recommended that a frame was put up, and they built specially a very substantial girder frame because the site is 18 feet at the back and 43 feet at the front. This frame had to be made to hold the two houses apart so that next door would not drop anymore. And this frame was costing the insurance company, I think, about £1,500 a week. And this went on for nearly a year while the party wall surveyors and the engineers bickered, you could say, about what was going to happen next. The thing that stressed us most, perhaps more than the building work having stopped, was when were the insurers going to start paying us out some of the claim, because I think we were into tens of thousands before anything came back from the claim. But thanks to the extremely good officers of renovation underwriting who got involved, Douglas came down personally and sort of assessed that we were actually being straight.
As soon as I met Andrew and Carol, it was very blatantly clear that they'd actually run an extremely prudent and well-administered project, but they'd also paid really good attention to their policy wording and made sure that their contractor had done the same. And on that basis, we obviously want to be able to engage and to help them as quickly as we can to come to a resolution.
If you're doing something like this, we assessed the builder very carefully. We went and looked at a couple of projects he'd done. We got a quantity surveyor to make sure that everything that the builder was proposing was sensible and reasonable. We had a conservation architect, we selected him from 3, and the structural engineer had worked in ICF before. We did quite a lot of staff work to make sure we had a good, strong team before we started. However, after a time, the war of attrition begins to wear you down, and it became quite clear that even once we got, as we did eventually, grudging agreement that we could restart with even more conditions and monitoring than we'd had before. So in the end, we decided life's too short. We cannot go on forever fighting this, because it could be another 5 years before we've actually got the house completed. And so we gave up and said we put the house on the market, the site on the market, and said we would rebuild our old house instead.
We were very, very committed to this house for a long time. So it was quite a lot to give up at the moment we decided we just couldn't keep going any longer. However, life's got to go on, and you then think about this house and what we'll do with this one. So we've tried to be philosophical about it, but it was a big disappointment at the time to give it up.
And the site is for sale with full planning approval. So it is quite likely that no one is going to want to go back into the planning process. Whoever buys it is likely to build, at least externally, the same house, because that will avoid going through the planning process again.
One of the major disconnects that we see in projects all the time is that contractors and structural engineers might advocate a method for construction that is low cost, but what they don't do is balance that against the subjectivity of high risk. And quite a lot of the time, given that you're going to have to live next to these people maybe for 20 years, actually you're better off with a higher cost method, but it being lower risk. And I think potentially in this situation, if an auger method had been used for actually drilling the holes rather than a percussive method, then the chances of damage would have been much lower. But that decision, in fairness, could only have been made if the project professionals here had been aware of the structural integrity, or lack of it, of the gable end wall of the neighbouring property.
We had £5 million of non-negligence insurance. Now, they are not going to start paying out potentially up to 5 million without doing a lot of checks to make sure that you have fulfilled, crossed every little T and dotted every I in your on the policy. So yeah, make sure you've got the right policy, and be absolutely scrupulously honest with your insurance company, because if you give them the least excuse not to pay out, they'll take it. I can say that, can't I?
Yes,
It's true.
If I was giving advice to somebody, I'd say, be like Andrew and Carol, make sure that you administer this stuff properly, because it makes it so much easier for us at the point of claim to say, yes, you've done this, 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 this and this, which is what we asked you to do, no problem, we'll get on and pay.